it would not surprise me at all. And I'm not saying this like for clicks or hyperbole. It would not surprise me if Mecole Hardman had more receiving yards than Xavier Worthy did this year. I am so excited for this cold open. When I saw it on the show sheet, I was immediately like, man, when I see a good creative idea, I always want to steal it. You know, it's just where my mind goes. And I feel like I want to take this from now on. So the cold opening is probably one of my favorite things I've done in a podcast episode.
Dude, you guys have like semi cold open type stuff when you're doing like especially like the vlog type stuff that you've done, right? It's like it's not just like, hey, welcome to today's episode. Today we're going to be talking about blah, 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 blah. It's not like that usually.
Yeah. I mean, any of the documenting stuff is more like storyline told. So we never have like any hard openings. It's just like what's going to be the best for the overall video. And even in my individual fantasy videos, I kind of hate the idea of like, introducing the video and be like, hey, this is what we're going to talk about. I still do it, but I like to just start talking about things that are a little bit random because it does catch people off guard. But if you have like a good soothing communication style, I feel like it kind of hooks you in. And then you're like, I'm in now. I'm in for 30 seconds. I might as well be in for 60 minutes.
Well, I started my Becoming a Best Ball Bro series in the podcast feed over the last month or so. And on the show earlier this week that dropped, I introed it. The cold open was me talking about the movie Homeward Bound. So like, there's no better intro and grabber than talking about a movie from the early 90s that everyone forgot about, you know?
Yeah. And it gets your like energy level really high from the rip, you know, because you're like adrenaline's up and then you're high energy for the rest of the episode.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, I'm doing it like, I get really annoyed by like the same old stuff in the fantasy space. And I think that you're the perfect person to talk about this because you've done some crazy stuff with BDGE, and I want to get into that. But like, even the late round podcast, like the reason the podcast exists is because I got so annoyed and tired of all the hour-long shows that was the same thing, talking about like NFC North preview and like all these things that like anyone can come up with that content, like there's nothing, not to say that like the people who are doing that content are bad and wrong and should stop doing it and quit their jobs. Mostly that if you want to really differentiate what you're doing, I mean, I'm trying to dig into these like really particular topics in 20 minutes as opposed to, hey, let's talk about Caleb Williams and the Bears offense and kind of go team preview, by team preview. But you guys at BDGE, man, I want to get into this a little bit because I feel like you're probably the least, and don't take this the wrong way, you're the least Twitter person that I brought onto late round perspectives so far, right? Like yes. You understand, back whenever I started doing the fantasy stuff, this was back in like 2011, right? And Twitter was really like the vehicle and the platform for a lot of sports discussion. And like, if you wanted to build a brand, especially an individual brand, you were on Twitter and that's really where you wanted your follower counts to be up. But obviously things have changed, things have shifted, and you've focused your energy and your efforts on things like YouTube. You guys are big on TikTok as well. But give me sort of like the start to now of BDGE in case people are within the Twitter bubble, which I think does exist a lot in the fantasy football world.
For sure. I take that as the opposite of however you like it. That was the ultimate compliment. I love that you said I'm just like outside of fantasy Twitter. I along with you think like a lot of the things in the industry are pretty insufferable. If I had to put it in one word or look at it from one perspective, not that I don't, I know a lot of people work really, really hard. So I don't want to like, downplay or make anyone feel bad, but I do think a lot of the same stuff is recycled and repeated, and it's not from like a place of internal inspiration or motivation. And when it comes from someone else, then as it's repeated, it sounds like somebody else. And I think that's a big problem within the space for sure. BDGE started, I don't really know how to say when it started, because right now, I mean, we are much more running as like a real operation and a business, and there's a team here and some structure behind it. When I started, though, obviously it was just me wanting to make fantasy football content. Like me and a bunch of my high school friends played in a fantasy league together that we were super serious about. We started probably when I was in like 9th or 10th grade. And I kept winning like 4 out of the first 5 years. I kept winning, and I was like, man, I'm like kind of good at this thing, and I want to teach people how to get better at it. And it was just like a very genuine, like raw passion for it, raw passion to teach people things that I thought I knew. Now, I started blogging right away because at the time, like you said, people came up in the industry when I was that age. They were either podcasting, and it was probably even before that, but mostly like Twitter and blogging. And I was like, okay, that's probably what I have to do, I guess, if I want to break through, because the people that I'm watching, that's what they're doing, right? Like I have to go and do that kind of thing. I realized really quickly, like I dislike writing. I really, really strongly don't like writing. It's just not how I express myself well. So immediately I figured out, like, I like being on camera. I like recording, whether it's audio or video. It's like where I feel comfortable. It's where I feel like my best version of myself, that I could really talk to the world and like get my message out there. So really quickly I pivoted over to YouTube, right? I started making videos and I was like, where can I put videos? And naturally, like, YouTube was the place to do it at the time. And, for the most part still is. Obviously there are a lot of changes along the way, but to me, it wasn't like any sort of like savvy business decision. It was just like, I want to make videos. This is where I can put them on, right? I didn't know where else to put them. So I did that. I didn't take it like too seriously at first. Again, it was just more of like a side thing that I liked doing. And it was something I was super passionate about. The more I did it though, the more organic traction I saw coming over to what I was doing. And I wasn't like promoting it. I wasn't like showing my friends and family like, hey, I'm doing this thing, can you share it? I was just happy to do it. And I was scared to put myself out there. I didn't actually want to share it with other people, to be, quite honest. Because it's a vulnerable thing when you're starting to make content and putting yourself out there. But the more I put into it, the more I got back from it. And I was like, you know what? I wonder what would happen if I really like went all in on this, and I put all of my focus and like energy and time and committed to it for at least like a decent chunk of time, just to see what would happen. And there was a summer, I don't remember which summer it was, but it was probably like 7 or 8 years ago at this point, where I would get up and I would literally just like make videos pretty much nonstop. I would work all day on like researching for the videos, making the videos, editing them, thumbnails, etc. The whole deal. And I did that for like 4 or 5 months straight. And in that time period, things like, I don't want to say they like blew up, but relative to where I was like, okay, there's like real traction here. So there's something in the market telling me that there's like a demand for this. So once I saw that, I was like, all right, this could be kind of like my North Star of what I'm working on, for the rest of my life kind of thing. But at the time I still needed to, I was young. I was like 21, 22, kind of just coming out of college. So I needed to like work and get a job, but I was doing this anytime I had like side time, whether it was at lunch during my actual job or like after I got home commuting, whatever. And I just kept kind of building it up year over year until I got to a point where I was at work, but I would spend like all of my time in the kitchen area, like on my laptop, working on my own shit, whether it was tinkering the menu on the website or doing research for the next video kind of thing. I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm not making enough money to just like leave my job. But if I could leave and like do something from this job and make a little bit of money and like kind of make the two worlds meet, that would, like, I'm wasting my time here. They're wasting my time. I'm wasting their time. Like, it doesn't really make sense. So I ended up leaving that job pretty soon after that. And I was in like the social media world as it relates to like my full-time job. And I had learned some skills that were pretty new in the world. It was just like paid traffic for social. So like running Facebook ads, Instagram ads, Twitter ads, and things like that. And this was back in, again, like 2014, 2015, I want to say. So it was new, and I was able to like pick up some freelance gigs, e-commerce and other like local businesses that were near me, like physically. And I made some money doing that. And I continued to do the content stuff on the side until it eventually just like collided. And I was making enough money from the content through either selling my own draft guide or affiliates, working with like the underdogs and those types of companies. And then as the years kind of passed by, I've unsuccessfully and successfully tried to scale it, brought team members on. We have other creators here now, and we have video editors and producers and people that do different things and work on the tech stuff. So we've tried to scale over the 6 or 7 year period, and we have an office here in New York. And a lot of that is because like when I left my last corporate job, it gets lonely really, really quickly. I'm an independent person, but as soon as I was like not around anybody for long periods of time, you're kind of like, I kind of miss the human interaction, the team development here. So I've kind of been like working, reverse engineering my way back into an office, but just on my own terms. And it's taken, I don't want to take any credit away from anyone that's helped me build this, but obviously that was like a 5, 6, 7, 8 year grind to get back to where we are working like every day. So fast forward to today, where We're a brand that makes a ton of sports content, obviously, a lot of NFL related, fantasy football, a lot of trivia stuff, a lot of behind the business, like vlog, documenting type of stuff. So I think it's all equally important to us. But realistically, I think we're just an expression of passion from the people that are inside the office.
Yeah, I mean, I remember whenever I first was introduced to what you guys were doing and you and I started talking a little bit, we've been talking for a few years now, but like, when I was introduced to it, I was like, man, it's crazy that there isn't really this kind of vibe in the space where, you don't really have just like, I don't want to call it barstooly because it's not, necessary, but like you understand the assignment of having personalities, having, like voices within what you're doing as opposed to just another byline on a website. And I think that's what's really separated you guys from, what other people are doing within the space. Not only are you doing really creative content and fun content and different types of content, but also like you're focusing on the right things to focus on. Like you're focusing on, I'm assuming that's all been something that you've thought about and something that's that you have strived to do as opposed to just like, oh yeah, I just walked into this person who can, like be decent in front of a camera and be a good personality.
Yeah. I mean, it's a reflection of a lot of people in here that have consumed the content and then wanted to be a part of it. And I so strongly believe that like just the way media works and social media in itself, that over, the next decade or whatever, I think a lot of great companies are going to be built. But I actually think the ones that really like stand out are the ones that have like your content has to be great, right? Because that becomes distribution. Your product has to be great because that's what people are going to pay for if it's a good experience for them. But I think there's this element of documentation to it, the story behind what you're actually doing and being able to be vulnerable and relate to people needs to be told through content. And that's how you hit that next tier of greatness realistically. And I also think there is, I don't want to say I'm like calculated about it, but it's always just felt very right for me. So it might look calculated from the outside, but it always felt like documenting and showcasing this stuff was the right thing to do. And what it's also given us the advantage of is like when you make that other type of content, when you feel like you need to express yourself about something other than football, it feels like a natural platform for that. Because I do think, especially in this industry, you can get very, very, very burnt out from talking about the same thing day over day over day over week over month over year. And if you don't eventually develop a different outlet, like I think most people in our industry probably need to look for another outlet based on the amount of work we do in this space, that could be really detrimental to you as a creator. And as individual creators like yourself and I am, like we always need to be innovating and invigorating our own content. And like, man, if you lose the passion for it, you're not going to be able to edge out other people. So you need that other like side of release or expression or fulfillment from other parts of life. And for me, honestly, it's been a lot of like running the brand and the business and the marketing and making content around that, just like these types of conversations are. It's like such a breath of fresh air for me and such a release for me that has helped like push me past some of the football stuff that I get burnt out with,
Yeah, no, I totally understand. That honestly, at its core, is the reason why I left FanDuel. Like, I had a very good job. I have nothing but good things to say about the gig, the people there, the company, all that kind of stuff. And whenever I said I was leaving, people are like, oh man, he got fired, or he, just the typical stuff that people will say online. It's like, no, I just needed a change. Like in any job, you hit these lulls where you're like, I need some of this passion and creative fire to sort of come back. And, I've fortunately been able to get that with late round fantasy football. But then, even within the podcast feed, like the documentation stuff that you're talking about, like that's what becoming a best ball bro is all about. I'm literally documenting myself becoming a best ball bro and just being open and honest about my exposure to players, how I'm approaching these drafts. And obviously it's a fantasy football related thing, but I've said this so many times. This is the first time with that show where I don't have to really be the expert. Like I don't have to sit back and be like, hey guys, listen to me. This is all the research I'm doing. I know that this is like stuff that you can win with, right? I'm finally able to just kind of sit back and like go along this journey with others and sort of be their peers, if you will. Instead of every podcast you listen to when it's advice driven, like the fantasy football space is, you're inevitably talking down to people, right? Because you're saying, hey, this is like, go pick up this guy or go draft this guy. I'm the expert. You have to listen to me. And it does get draining, man. Like it's a lot whenever that's not, also it's difficult if that's like not really your personality. Like I don't really enjoy like telling people what to do or anything like that. It's more so I just love fantasy football and I love researching this stuff and I want to get my voice out there. But it's been nice to sort of have that change of pace a little bit with becoming a best ball bro.
Yeah, I mean that's why I like the documenting stuff is so it's fun. It's scary to put yourself out there in that way, but it is this like, okay, cool. We're like working with each other. We are like going on this journey kind of together. And it's okay for me to be infallible. It's okay for me to like up here and there. You do it. I do it too. I mean, we live in a social world where like people's validation comes from like the downfall of people above them in a sense. You know, that's why people want to talk shit. That's why people like love to just chirp at you on Twitter and chirp at you in the comments because it just makes them feel better. Like they look at you and they're like, I wish I had taken that path. I wish I was 20 years old and worked really hard at my passion. And now that I see someone else doing it, like I feel that inside and it hurts. So I'm going to take it out on you kind of thing, you know? And we have a very large majority of people that do that and operate that way. And when you get to go through more of like the documentary style of content and you get to be more open and vulnerable, you know, they're like, and that's one of the other reasons why I felt like I needed to share the story, share the story of us and document everything was to like show, especially the younger kids, like this wasn't by accident. I know that you can put out a TikTok video and get 1 million views on it by tomorrow, but I've been working on this business legitimately every single day for the last 10 years straight. Like it's not an accident that I'm here. I've sacrificed a lot to be here. I've sacrificed like a lot of personal stuff to be here, you know? So it's like, if you can show that and get that through people's minds, I think it like hopefully inspires and hopefully clicks with them a little bit. So yeah, dude, that's really like the documentary style of stuff is not any sort of like, oh, we want to be, and we get that a lot, like the whole, the Barstool side of things. Like we're not trying to be Barstool. We're trying to show just like what's going on inside the walls for better or worse. We're not putting on a show here. Like, sure, we want to entertain and like we're fucking around in here, but that's also just like literally what's going on. We'll show the business side of things. We'll show, you know, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully it opens people up and like they want to just root for us and come along for the ride wherever it ends.
This episode is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. If you haven't played on Underdog yet, now's the time because Pick 8 is live for the NBA Finals. Create entries with up to 8 picks, and Underdog will automatically double flex entries so you can miss up to 2 picks and still win your entry. The best part is, you can win up to 325 times your original amount. Don't miss your chance to try Pick 8 before it's gone. Just head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app to sign up. And when you do, make sure you use promo code LATEROUND. That's one word. When you use that promo code and you make a deposit, you'll not only get a deposit offer, but you'll also be emailed a free copy of the Late Round Draft Guide when it drops on July 1st. That's UnderdogFantasy.com, promo code LATEROUND. Now back to the show. Yeah, look, now all the while you have been a fantasy analyst, right? Like this isn't just, you know, have not just been a businessman building this thing.
Yep.
You have been a fantasy analyst. So let's dig into that a little bit. What would you say is sort of like your process as a fantasy analyst? You know, I think people would probably put me in a bucket of, oh, that's the data nerd JJ talking about his stupid data stuff again. You know, Matt Waldman, they'd say, oh, there's Waldman grinding his film again. Where would you sort of place yourself on that spectrum?
I think it's probably it depends what part of the year. I would say, like, if I'm doing rookie stuff, I've gone completely, because now we have 2 channels now. We have the redraft channel and the dynasty channel. So we've completely split them up and we talk one or the other basically on the channels. When it's dynasty stuff, I'm really locked in on the rookie class coming in, and I've completely changed my way of evaluating for the most part to film first. And I think it's part because I feel like I have a really good grasp on what I'm looking for in the film, but partly also because I think the data as it relates to college players leaves a lot to be desired, which is something I think the industry is like obsessed with data that's like predictive. But the downfall is data is predictive, I feel like, when it's in the same environment. So if you tell me like, hey, this player did this in NFL year 1, that makes me feel like, okay, there might be data there to project into NFL year 2 and 3. Right. But going from a Conference USA college player to the NFL, like those numbers to me feel borderline irrelevant. So I'm kind of watching film and I'm saying, okay, if this guy is doing something, are people double counting? Like people will put like Twitter highlights up and they're like, this guy like made this play. And I'm like, it was a nice play, but 90% of players are also probably going to make that play in that situation. So I feel like a lot of rookie stuff gets double counted, and that's why like highlights go crazy, even though they're not that impressive of highlights, whatever. And I feel like people kind of lose context, whether it's number of men in the box or like the gaps being open with a guy like Jaylen Wright, who was playing against, 3-man fronts kind of thing. And a lot gets lost. And I feel like most people are not putting the work in to like watch the context behind it. So as it relates to rookie stuff, I'm watching a lot of film. I'm making my opinions, but then I'm making sure like what I see on film, probably 3 or 4 things will stand out to me per player. And then I'll go into the numbers afterwards. If I'm saying like Jaylen Wright, explosive as shit, now I'm going to look at his breakaway run rate, his percentage of 10 to 20 plus yard runs, the number of men in the box at the time, if I feel like all of the boxes were super, super light kind of thing. So I'm trusting my eyes first, but I'm not just going off the eyes. I'm making sure that I go into the things that stood out to me, backing up with stats. Athleticism matters to me, of course, but only in the sake that if I think a guy's an outlier or they're not playing against like real college competition, I want to make sure that they are as athletic as like real NFL players are. So there's kind of a pattern as like the seasons and the cycle goes through the offseason for rookies especially. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Look, it's music to my ears to hear you talk about like the Conference USA players and how they're translating to the NFL, because one of the because I'm obviously data heavy and, I have my prospect model and stuff, but like one of the very glaring obvious problems I've seen with like things like yards per team pass attempt or what have you is the lack of adjustment for the conference, the team. Right. And strength, right? Like a guy playing at Alabama, way different than someone playing at Western Michigan. And it's literally like some dude from PFF said like yards per out run matters 8 years ago. And then it's like the only thing people in the industry cite now. It's like, yeah, this guy had 5.7 yards per out run in like some shitty conference. I'm like I could show you 7 dudes that are terrible that had the same like metric or stat or whatever. And it's just, it's like no one can think for themselves, it feels like. Yeah, I think a part of the problem though with the data stuff is that people really look at data in silos and not looking at data sort of together, like different data pieces to really create some, like that's why, I'm never going to tell people, I even say in my prospect guide, I'm not telling people to strictly draft off of the model. Now I've tested the model. I know that the way that the model ranks players is actually better and more predictive than ADP has been, rookie ADP. And so like you could hypothetically be fine by doing that. But at the end of the day, like, I'm not going to say that whatever this is spitting out is absolutely going to happen. There's so much gray area in this. I mean, that's the entire point of why we're doing this in the first place, because there is that gray area and it's not black and white. I think the problem and sort of what you're alluding to is like when people just say this guy had a good yards per route run and it's a good one-off thing to talk about on a show, whatever, but there's going to be, there always needs to be context. Like, I think that even the stuff that people have been doing over the last like 2 or 3 years with yards per route run, looking at formations where if a guy's yards per route run is higher because his team's running a lot more 12 personnel and there's only 2 wide receivers on the field at once, that's probably why his yards per route run is a little bit higher, because when he's running routes, there's only one other wide receiver option on the field. Whereas if it's a number 3 or a number 4 guy, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to raise that number. Or if there's 3 or 4 wide receivers on the field, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to sort of raise that number. So like context is always needed for this kind of stuff. It's funny too, because like it's almost like the natural progression of like technology where you look back at the iPhone 10 years ago and you're like, I can't believe we use this shit relative to like what we see now. But at the time, you're like, this is the most powerful thing ever. Yeah. Same thing with stats, where it's like we're looking at yards per out run was incredible 8 years ago, and then yards per team pass attempt. And then now we're adjusting for men in the box and conferences and all this stuff. And it's like whatever is today's, flavor of the week will not be the same thing a year from now. And I think I've also taken my foot off the pedal as it relates to data things, because there are so many good people out there like yourself that are doing the work on that when they trust something, it's easy for me to be like the middleman that says like, hey, this is what I liked on film, but like here are some really good numbers that either contradict what I said, so think for yourself, or that back up what I'm talking about with a ton of context behind it. So I think a lot of people within the space, like yourself, you're very data driven, and I think people come and they trust numbers. Some people might come to me because they feel like I am a good mix of film and data, and maybe just are comfortable with my communication style. Like they can kind of sit there and just watch me for 20, 25, 30 minutes and feel like I kind of told them a story or something like that. You know what I mean? So I think there's mixes and fits for everybody in the space realistically. And I try not to like force myself into any of those boxes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before with just content creation. I think that you should be doubling down on like the things that, number one, you're good at, but also passionate about, right? Like if data, like anyone listening to this, that's an analyst or an aspiring analyst, it's like, if data isn't your thing, don't make it your thing. Like I've had so many people email me and ask me like what kind of coding I'm using, or like, ask me where I'm getting my data sources, and they don't know anything even about like Excel or something. And it's like, you don't need to go down this route. Like there are other things that you can do and try to figure out to be a part of this space. It doesn't need to be that thing. I think it's just doing whatever you know that you can provide utility, provide value, and bring something different to the table that might not be out there elsewhere. And look, when I discover something that's data driven, like a trend of some sort or something that no one's really talked about before, dude, I cannot wait until that podcast drops whenever I'm done. And that's when you know that you're in the right area, you're doing the right kind of content. And if that's not there for you, you shouldn't be doing it that way.
Yes. And that was like on the show sheet you sent over, you're like, what's one piece of advice you would give content creators, looking to improve in the fantasy space? And I think in today's world, like if you're just starting out as a creator, or even in your the first couple of years, you are so overwhelmed by the amount of things that you're supposed to do. Like you're supposed to be on YouTube, and you're supposed to have a podcast, and you're supposed to have a TikTok, and you're supposed to be data driven and watch film. And like, I just keep coming back to this notion that like you have to be great somewhere before you can be good everywhere. Yeah. And I think if you asked anyone successful in this space where they started, they would hit you with like one thing that they built all their leverage through one thing. And then eventually, once you get so good at that, you start to, resources start to come in because you've built leverage, and then you could start to disperse that leverage elsewhere. Like we're able to grow multiple YouTube channels and on TikTok and post on Twitter and Instagram because we've built the leverage through YouTube first, right? And I feel fortunate that like no one was making YouTube content when I started, but you probably feel the same way when you started, and the person before you felt the same way then they started, and the dudes who are blowing up on TikTok feel the same way about it now. And like, it's the same cycle over and over again. But the common denominator I found is like, you have to be obsessed and be great at like the one thing, and that's where you build your leverage from. And it's got to be like very intrinsic to you. Solve the problem that you're looking for. Don't try to just solve the problem that somebody else is already solving, because they've already solved it pretty much.
Yeah, that's well said. I mean, look at Matt Harmon. He did reception perception. Look at, other, like, I mean, the only reason why I was able to launch my career is because of the late round quarterback strategy way back in the day, right? Like, there's always that one thing. I used to get writers emailing me all the time when I was at Number Fire, because we'd recruit writers all the time. And, I'd get these people like sending me these like examples, these writing samples, and it would be like a rankings write up and then just like a little blurb about each player. And my response, like, I was always like, try to give constructive criticism whenever people would email me. And it was sort of along the lines of like, nobody knows who you are right now, so no one's going to care about your rankings. They care about your rankings after you've established yourself by doing X, Y, and Z, right? Yes. Like, don't go out there just being like, check out my rankings, they're going to be good. It's like, it doesn't matter. Like it's just, it's not a big deal to the consumer, because it shouldn't be a big deal to the consumer. They need to gain that trust through the other things that you're doing, before they realize, oh, this guy's competent or this gal is competent, and they're able to, give me, the fantasy advice that I really need and want.
Yeah. And I think a lot of breaking through the space is going back to like being able to market yourself through content in the same way. It's like, okay, you find the thing that you're great at or that you want to talk about it. You have to understand where you should be putting that content out, right? And I think most people know. Like if I were to ask you like, man, I know you're spending your time on the podcast and like on YouTube, but it's like, where should you be spending your time? Like, where do you wish you had extra time to put time into? Like, what would your answer to that be?
Well, first off, I would say anything video, but like, so I want to grow YouTube a lot, but yeah, I mean, you go to like, you'd want to do stuff on TikTok. You'd want to do,
that's everyone's answer. And it's like, it's fine that you don't do it because you have a lot of leverage elsewhere.
Right.
But there's so many people in the space that know that answer that don't have leverage and then continue to do
100%
old shit. And it's like, when you can figure out the crossroads of like kind of perfection there within the fantasy space or content, there's something, like the dynasty space has completely blown a casket up, right? Like it is no longer a secret that it's probably going to be a gold mine for the next 3, 4, 5 years. That's the space I would be looking at because it's a very natural transition. So if you love dynasty, like that's where you should be creating a lot. And there are a lot of creators like kind of blowing up through YouTube right now in the dynasty space. It's still very new. And I would go to TikTok for it. And I would go, like, most people have the answers of where they should be, but they're so in love with like the old ways of how JJ, got big, how Nick got big, how people blew up on these platforms that it's like, you're not going to get there by doing that. You're going to get there by being in the places that you should be. It's not much deeper than that.
Yeah, dude, if I were starting today, I would not be doing what I did. There's no chance. It's like, okay, I have this valuable podcast that I have built up and really worked hard towards. I'm going to leverage that, of course, and then sort of work on these other things on the side. But if I were starting out, I'd be going to the non-traditional, I say traditional, I mean traditional as in like what we were doing 10 years ago, type platforms. Like, why would you not do that? I mean, you see it all the time. If you're just scrolling through TikTok right now, there are creators, like if you're in the Twitter bubble, and I know that we're spending more time on this than probably either of us expected, but like if you're in the Twitter bubble, which is where the fantasy football space has really been over the last 15 years or so, you might not even be aware of how big the creator economy is on TikTok or even on YouTube. It's crazy.
So, man, it's funny because I was kind of in that middle ground where like I consider you like an OG in the space, right? And like basically everybody that came before you.
I'm old. In
that OG range, but you guys kind of paved the way as it relates to like, Twitter and podcasts and stuff like that. And then I was kind of part of the new wave. I was very familiar with all your guys' work and I did some work in that space. And then I got into YouTube. And then I think most people after me were either like YouTube or down into like the TikTok platform. And I have guys in my office that are 21, 22 that are like breaking into the industry that you and like the OGs would have no idea who they are. And the reversal, don't take this the wrong way, don't know who you guys are either.
100%, yeah, of course, yeah.
And these guys are like, with the amount of opportunity out there, I mean, like financially and monetarily, these guys are crushing it, are probably making more just from like affiliate deals than 99% of the blue check marks on Twitter. And it goes to the fact that like these things change very quickly and it could happen to anyone, but it's obviously the younger generation is just like kind of tapped in more to that. But it's like, I can't tell you how real it is that these guys are going to be full-time, cappers on TikTok or full-time fantasy analysts on TikTok within like 2 years because they just understood really where to go and the space moves quickly. And I feel really fortunate to like surround myself with the younger people, but still try to stay in tune and like understand what's going on with everybody in the space. Because, like I said before, as individual creators, we need to be always thinking about what the next thing is. And a lot of it comes from, internal, like, what do I want to do next? Combining with where is like the culture and where's the market going?
Yeah, man, I could talk about this kind of stuff for hours, literally hours.
I'm here for it, bro.
Yeah. Okay, so your prospecting stuff. So you do prospecting work. I'll quickly ask you, within your rookie drafts this year, was there anything that really stood out, whether it was like a player being massively undervalued over and over again or overvalued over and over again, or like the way that people sort of viewed the running back class in general, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I probably have an answer for both of those. I would say that I guess it's not a surprise, but no one really liked Bo Nix. No one really thought Michael Penix was a first round pick. And now they are going in the same places in rookie drafts at the 111, the 202, the 205 that we've completely missed on every good quarterback ever. That was, the Justin Herberts, the Josh Allen, whatever it is, right? We're just making the same mistakes over and over and over and over again. So I guess I'm surprised, but I guess I'm not surprised that these guys like, Nix and Penix go that late. But to touch on your other point, the running back class. So going into it, this was an objectively like underwhelming running back class.
Yeah.
I think that and I don't want to take like the cliche way out and be like, oh, it's kind of deep though. I wouldn't say it's like it's like deep, but I do think this class has a handful of dudes like Marshawn Lloyd and Trey Benson and Jalen Wright and even probably like the Isaac Guerrero that have they're so similar to like DeAndre Swift or a Miles Sanders, where they have this like crazy upside of athleticism mixed with like kind of terrible vision. Like they miss holes all the time and they don't know how to read the offensive line, the leverage from their linemen often. But that makes for like really interesting fantasy prospects where they might be like the RB32 next year. But I wouldn't be surprised if you told me any of those four guys had top 6 fantasy upside because they're so explosive. And it's like if they're in the right situation where we've seen that from Swift, where he's great when he's great and he's bad when he's bad. Miles Sanders is great when he's great and he's really bad when he's bad. And I think I think we have a large class of those guys who I think could legitimately have like an RB5 finish and then an RB35 finish the next year.
Yeah, no, I like that take a lot. I also think that, you know, the lack of just like blue chip running backs in this class is a huge reason why it has the perception that it does. Whereas like I think Jonathan Brooks could be really, really good. And if not for the ACL, he would have probably been considered more of a blue. Like he, in my prospect model, I've said this plenty on the show, but in my prospect model, like he literally ranked from a prospecting standpoint right next to like Kenneth Walker and Javonte Williams. Like he was that good of a prospect, like according to the stuff that I'm looking at. And so, you know, I think that if he didn't have the ACL, I think literally that one player could change perception completely of how this running back class just looked entering the season, entering the NFL. And so, you know, if he ends up hitting, then all of a sudden we'll look back and we'll be like, oh man, yeah, this actually wasn't that bad of a class, even with just that one guy.
Yeah, it's like you could tell the story so easily. Brooks is so much fun as a prospect. He was the first running back that I like watched film on, and I was like, I don't think there's going to be a back that I like better in this class. Like immediately, he looks like Aaron Jones. He's smooth. He's a good cutter. And what I not like, I guess, but the ACL is not a huge concern for me because he's so young. He's just 20 years old.
Right.
So by the time he's 2 years removed from the ACL, he's 22, and I don't really have a concern. The backfield will be entirely his by that point. But like, is anyone going to be surprised when Trey Benson's the starter in Arizona next year when James Conner is gone? No. There's like very clear path for all of these running backs to play really, really well. And because they have like insane athleticism pretty much across the board in this class, it shouldn't be a surprise when they do hit. I think a lot of classes are like, oh, they're deep here, but like they're not great prospects for the most part across the board. We just like them, right? And a lot of it goes back to just there's so many people on Dynasty Twitter that like eventually you're going to come across 5 threads about this 4th round running back and this 6th round running back that, you know, you're going to have 3,000 people on Twitter that love that guy because of the threads they come across. And then it just becomes like everyone just yelling at each other into the void, and I don't know, it's a mess.
Yeah, no, I feel you. Are there any sleepers in this class that you're really into?
I'm trying to think about how like deep. It's weird because when you're so close to it, it feels like any name you say is like a cop out.
Yeah,
like,
I know.
Not a sleeper because everyone knows it. I love Javon Baker out in New England. He was one of my favorite wide receivers. Great possession guy. I think he goes into an offense that has like a ton of opportunity there, obviously, to be a player. Tyrone Tracy is really cool out there in New York. He was, you know, a wide receiver that just really didn't get his run. They finally put him out running back. He's a little bit of like a Debo build.
Explosive.
5'11", 6 foot, 215, really, really athletic. And obviously as a wide receiver, he can catch the ball. So he's got that three down skill set with like very little competition in front of him, Devin Singletary. And then I kind of touched on Isaac Guerrero. When he was a dude that I had no idea who he was prior to the combine. And then he blew away the combine. And then I was like, all right, I guess I got to watch this guy. And I was I was expecting to see like a kind of an awful running back that was just really athletic. Yeah. I was really surprised by his tape. I thought he was like a very good running back. I thought he understood like his offensive lineman. I thought he understood how to hit holes and use leverage and understood when to use the burst and the athleticism he had. So I'm actually like super excited to see if he can win that RB2 role in San Francisco.
Yeah, he got I thought Pacheco was a little bit better of a prospect, like the numbers and stuff that I'm looking at, but he got a Pacheco comp for me. Like it was still it's like in that sort of grouping in that archetype for sure.
Hell yeah.
Let's shift our focus a little bit to redraft. I saw that you dropped a video on some of the players that you're avoiding. I think that it's going to be good to have sort of the altering perspective on this. I'm not necessarily There's one guy I definitely want to dig into because I'm much higher than you are on him. The other two, I think, I totally get. So let's just go through three guys that I thought were the most intriguing, the most interesting that you brought up. Let's start with Drake London. You see him as a player to avoid right now. I'm assuming that you're sort of working off of underdog drafts and best ball. But I mean, that's really like all we can work off of at this point of the offseason. But tell me what it is about London.
Yeah, where do you think? I mean, in underdog, his price is insane. It's like the 201, 202 if you want to take him there. Where do you think? And obviously, this time in the year, the only place to really draft where you're getting any sort of real inkling of what the season's going to be like. Come August, come early September, like where do you think Drake London's going to be going in like friends and family leagues, or even like maybe a little bit of a step up from that?
I think that probably the end of the second would be more realistic and into the third. My thing though with London's ADP is, well, number one, we obviously know that underdog's wide receiver heavy and people are going to lose it over wide receivers. But like round two, I don't know how you feel about it. Round two just kind of sucks this year. Like
it's tough.
Like you get into round two and you're like, man, why is there a rookie wide receiver sitting here? And you're like, oh, it's because there's just so many. And like, even right now, as we're drafting, there's like that like queasiness with like going with one of the San Francisco wide receivers, even because one of them, leaves and all of a sudden your stacks are blown up and that guy's not going to probably perform as well on a team that's not for San Francisco. Or you look at Chris Olave and you're like, yeah, he's solid, but is the upside, is he going to be a top 5 wide receiver? And then you look at, Marvin Harrison obviously being, a rookie, and then the running backs that are there, you can poke holes in the arguments for both of them because they have mobile quarterbacks, Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley. And so you're just kind of like, looking at the landscape, like I've gotten a ton of like Jaylen Waddle, for instance, because it's just an easy, safe, the target share is going to be there. His numbers last year were actually really, really good. They were actually better than 2022 on like a per route run basis and like all that. And so it's like, I'm just going to go with that route. But I think that's a lot of the reason why Drake London is where he's at. It's just that it's easy to call him out because he's sort of at the top of that tier, right? Like that's sort of probably, I'm assuming, part of like the logic for you with him.
Yeah, I mean, it's twofold. It's one that like, a month ago he was at, I don't know, the 212, which it's a totally different conversation. When you're talking about a delta of 10 picks within a 24 pick period, right? Percentage wise, that's a massive gap, obviously. I'm a Falcons fan and I'm trying not to be biased. I'm trying not to be biased here, but like we are just paper champions right now. And I think there are a lot of reasons to be pessimistic about this team. I think a lot of things need to break right for Drake London to return what value you're passing up on at the 201. It's no surprise all these talking points where Kirk is old. Dude, Kirk is very old and he's coming off of this serious Achilles injury. What happens when he takes that first shot down by his legs? Like, what if he's not mentally there? What if he is scared to plant off that foot for like the first month of the season? That's scary for a lot of deep shots to Drake London. I mean, the target competition, I think, is a talking point. I don't know if that's really going to be the thing that holds down Drake London. I think you can make the point that they're going to pass the ball a lot, whatever. Our defense is like atrocious. It's really, 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 really bad. And you could say like, hey, I think this is a big talking point in fantasy football where people say, oh, they're going to let up a lot of points. We're going to have to be in shootouts, et cetera. The other side of that sword is also when you let up a lot of points, the other team is on the field for a very, very long time. And their time of possession is very high. So when you do get the ball back, if you go 3 and out, that's a lot of time now that they get the ball back. You know what I mean? I just have a lot of pessimism around the Atlanta Falcons. We've been down the road before. Bijan can have an all-pro season. What if Kyle Pitts bounces back with like 1,200 yards? Is there enough upside to kind of go around in that offense, man? New coaching staff. There's like a lot of changes, and it all needs to go right for Drake London to return value at 201.
I almost feel like the London thing is almost identical to Garrett Wilson right now. Is it not? Like it's an old quarterback coming off an Achilles, an elite running back sitting back there. I think the one thing that probably would favor Wilson in a projection / why Wilson is going ahead of London, which happens in pretty much, like 98% of drafts probably, is the Kyle Pitts factor. Like there's no Kyle Pitts. There's no like potential stud sitting in that New York offense like there is with Pitts. Would that be like the differentiator for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a part of it. I also think like, and I don't want to go too much into like the eye test and be like, oh, he looks better. Garrett Wilson kind of pops off on the screen. London has his plays for sure. Wilson looks like a young Stephon Diggs. And the other thing that like you can't not look at is the fact that Garrett Wilson had 170 targets last year, which is that's like that. Those are crazy numbers, right? Drake London is topping out.
We've seen it.
Yeah, he's topping out with like 110 targets, obviously with Arthur Smith, the new quarterback, all that kind of stuff. But like Garrett Wilson's regression is 155 targets, where Drake London's huge progression is 130, 140. Maybe they're more valuable. Similar. I just think we've seen a little bit more from Wilson. We've seen a little bit more of what we're going to need in terms of like yards after the catch. I think he's a little bit better of a route runner. I think he can make plays on his own, and that entire passing offense is going to funnel through him. We've seen Aaron Rodgers, like when he dials in on his one, the one is like a real alpha one. Yeah. So I think if he got a little bit of sprinkle, but I'm equally concerned. Like I don't have faith. Right. Going into last year, I was super skeptical about the Jets offense altogether. You know, whatever happened with Rodgers, but prior to that, like they were the paper champions, right? They were on paper. They were going to the Super Bowl. That feels a lot like what the Falcons are going through right now. And I just have a lot of pessimism about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes to show what you're talking about, where it's just like this, like there's just not that many, there aren't that many concrete players like at the end of the first and into the second and throughout the second. And I think that the Wilson and London thing is just a really good example of like, we're going to have to just do a little projecting this year to feel at least moderately comfortable getting these guys. Like right now, like I'm fine with London. I'm fine with Wilson. You have your take on London, which is totally understandable. I understand that range of outcome with him and seeing, the downside. Another player that you had on that list was Xavier Worthy, rookie stepping in though to a situation that's kind of intriguing. You get Kansas City, Patrick Mahomes. They finally have sort of this vertical threat, and Kansas City, massive touchdown regression candidates just in terms of like their total touchdown score. They're going to probably score 10 plus more touchdowns this year than they did last year, more than likely. So what is it about Worthy and his price that just has you avoiding him?
I feel like we just keep trying to play this game with the KC wide receivers, and it's not usually a product of like, oh, it's Patrick Mahomes, a wide receiver has to do it. In almost all situations when we try to do this, it's, oh, Aaron Rodgers is, he just doesn't pass to his tight end. When he has a tight end, like maybe, you know what I mean? We try to like play through these loopholes. Xavier Worthy, for me, the reason I don't like him, it's not obviously the Kansas City situation is about as pristine as you can get. Didn't love him as a prospect. Like when I watched the Texas film, that was probably one of the most fun films for me to watch because you have Xavier Worthy, you have Adonai Mitchell. And I watched Adonai and I was like, I love this dude. Like I thought he was so good. And I look at his numbers and I'm like, this is going to be a fun one because I know all of Dynasty Twitter is going to hate his ass. Everyone's going to hate him. I look at Xavier Worthy's freshman numbers and I'm like, they're all going to love him. Like this is going to be the great debate of this offseason. I couldn't be more on Adonai. I couldn't be more off Xavier Worthy. Just from like, he's one of those dudes where broke out as a freshman and didn't really improve his numbers afterwards. And I think we see that often with really athletic players. Like you're a freshman coming onto the scene with 4.21 speed. You're going to catch your opponents by surprise. What happens when you rely so heavily on athleticism is like you stop to progress your other parts of your game. You're so heavily reliant on that stuff. And when you don't progress year over year, like that's eventually going to catch up to you. And I feel like a lot of that happened with Xavier Worthy. And what's funny too is like for so many years we talked about like if Xavier Worthy came out the year before Devontae Smith, he would be like 165 pounds, right? Like no one even really mentions his weight anymore or his size about how that's like an outlier if he hits. He's also like so small. And when I look at Worthy and the lack of improvement and he's not really a red zone threat, I think a lot of his production came behind the line of scrimmage, a ton of screen passes. He had very few big plays for someone who is so fast and supposed to be like a downfield threat. And that's concerning to me. So if a lot of your stuff is like pre-planned production, that I don't know how well that translates into the NFL. Dude, here's the way I look at Mecole Hardman, man. Or here's the way I look at Xavier Worthy.
Wow, was that a little slip there?
It was a little foreshadowing just because they just re-signed Mecole Hardman today, right? They re-signed him to another year. It would not surprise me at all. And I'm not saying this like for clicks or hyperbole. It would not surprise me if Mecole Hardman had more receiving yards than Xavier Worthy did this year. I don't really think it would surprise most people.
Yeah. I like that. We're gonna have to grab that and put that at the front of the episode on YouTube.
That felt like TikTok energy coming out of me as soon as I fucking said it. But I meant that with like everything in my soul, because I feel like McColl's gonna go for 613 and Xavier Worthy's gonna have 594 yards, and Hollywood's gonna have 840 yards, and it's just gonna be a mess with like no consistency. I don't love him as a prospect, and the situation of him being with Mahomes is overhyped because like Mahomes just doesn't turn everybody into a superhero. He just has had superheroes around him, right? Like Tyreek Hill into Hill.
Look, if this comes down to you didn't like the dude as a prospect, right? You should not.
Long-winded way of saying that. Yes.
Yeah, but like you should not let the situation overshadow that. Like you like absolutely like stick to those to your prospect evaluation, because the situation's not gonna be able to. I mean, it might elevate him a little bit, but it's not going to elevate him to being what we need him to be in fantasy football. So look, I don't mind Worthy as a prospect. I do think that there are times where I'm in these best ball drafts and I'm like kind of a little bit surprised that he's going where he's going, especially whenever you have other really good rookie wideouts sort of in the same range where he's going that you can click on and feel a little bit more confident in their, whether it be year one profile or just talent profile in general. I get it if you're stacking, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not like for or against Worthy, but I do think it was interesting that you had him on your list. The last guy I want to talk about though is the one that I do disagree with. Like more, with the other two is just like, yeah, I get it. But Jayden Daniels was on your list, and let me just say, I think that you're the only fantasy analyst that has come out and said that you're low on Jayden Daniels this year. Because I feel like every other analyst that I've seen on the streets, the Twitter streets, I've been relatively high on him. And look, there's reason for it. I can get into some of that, but I want to hear your anti-Daniels take. He's going like QB 11-ish, QB 12-ish right now. And that seems to be very high for you. Yeah.
Yeah. It feels expensive. I'll just start off by saying I think I'd rather like die than actively choose a quarterback in a Cliff Kingsbury offense again. I have very little faith in him being able to run a smooth ship over there. So I do not like the coaching staff coming in. I thought we saw that play itself out in Arizona, where everything became gimmicky. They could not run a successful offense as soon as things started to fall apart a little bit. And when I think about Washington over the last like couple of years, I think it's easy to have talked yourself into being like, oh, they have a pretty good like weapon group. I don't think you can really say that anymore. They have their true alpha in Terry McLaurin. Behind him, like Curtis Samuel is gone. You have Jahan Dotson, but Jahan Dotson was about as bad as it gets last year. Yeah. And if he is the player that he was last year, you have very little on that offense behind Terry McLaurin. So like, if I'm looking at a quarterback where I'm saying like, I'm one injury away from having arguably, a bottom 3, a bottom 5 receiving group in the NFL, I'm a little bit worried about that. I think the obvious thing with Daniels and his upside is his rushing.
Right.
And I don't want to try to predict like, oh, he runs a lot, so he's going to get hit a lot. But he's going to get hit a lot because he runs more than the average quarterback, along with the fact that this Washington offensive line allowed almost 4 sacks a game last year. It was like only the Giants allowed more sacks to their quarterbacks all last season. And it's not like they fixed up their entire offensive line. It's not like they add a lot of firepower to this offense. So I think you very rarely find a rookie quarterback going into a situation where the weapons are below average and he's going to see a ton of pressure immediately out of the gate, where that sets up for success. And I get it, like in underdog where you are able to have other quarterbacks rotate into your lineup in one QB leagues where you shoot for upside because you could just drop them and pick somebody else up. Yeah. I'm pretty much okay with that because, I mean, if you're getting 15, 16, 17 games out of Daniels, he's probably going to scoot for, 600, 5, 6, 7, right, whatever the case may be. And that'll be good to give you like blow up weekly games. I play in a lot of super flex leagues and I just feel like he becomes really risky to me in those formats. So I just really worry about the situation, not as much as him as a prospect necessarily, but I think we're like one thing happening away from it being like bottom of the league type of situation. And rookies very rarely survive that.
It's going to be really interesting to see where he goes in Superflex, like redraft, because, and not like best ball format, like managed league, because like you said, I mean, realistically, if he holds on to the QB 11-ish price tag, which I think he definitely will. Like, I doubt that he's going to get over like a Kyler, and probably not going to get over a Love and Dak. Yeah. But he might, just based on the hype and the rushing, like those last two guys, like there's a possibility. But it's like, why would you go after? Why would you draft him over Kyler when Kyler is literally going to give you the same rushing production and not be a rookie, right? And be in a better environment and stuff like that. The one thing that I will say too with Daniels, and I've written him up as being someone. Kyler to me is like the easy click when you're looking at like a non-elite. If you have a good counterpoint for this, I'd love to hear, because I didn't realize I had a strong take on Jayden Daniels, but when I saw the QB 11-12 price tag, I was like, man, I got him down at probably QB 18-19. I'm really far off where the industry is, and I think a lot of it is like you're seeing best ball players become like year-round lifestyle NFL consumers. So you have rookie drafts and dynasty drafts immediately just converging into best ball. So I would be surprised if Jayden actually doesn't drop down significantly, but like I'm very open to hearing the other side of the argument. Yeah, I think the other side is literally rushing. Yeah. It's quite literally rushing. If you look at, so I always look at quarterbacks in terms of their passing points per game and then their rushing points per game. Okay. Since 2011, we've had 35 quarterbacks where the passer threw it 300 or more times. That's just a threshold to say he was the starter for his team. Gotcha. And then he ran the ball he ran the ball for 5 or more rushing fantasy points per game. So 35 quarterbacks, right? It's not a guarantee that Daniels gets there, right? But I do think that he is a more prolific runner than the majority of guys that have come out. Sure. I think we should feel confident that of the guys, in this class and such, that we should feel good about Jayden Daniels being a relatively decent mobile quarterback. If you look at then those 35 quarterbacks, the lowest number of fantasy points scored per game of those 35 is 17.3. And that was from Josh Allen during his rookie season, where we know his passing numbers just were not there at all, right? And so I think that there is a floor to Daniels. Now, I do think that people might be taking the ceiling a little bit too far with Daniels, because if you look at this sample and you look at like the rookies, there's only 2, I think, that were part of the group, which was Josh Allen and Kyler Murray, and they were still both under 18 fantasy points, right? Where the chance that Daniels is indeed like this excellent passer year one, I don't think is very high, but I do understand the notion of shooting for upside. What if he is that guy, right? Like what if Daniels is the dude who can post 3,500 yards passing, which is relatively modest, and then 20 to 25 passing touchdowns with strong rushing production, then all of a sudden he's like a locked in QB1 in fantasy if he's able to do something like that, right? And then my other thing to you, my other, like, not really argument, but like, sort of like talking about the Drake London to Garrett Wilson thing. I think this one's even more drastic. Like, are you looking at Anthony Richardson the same way? Because I'm like unbelievably higher on him for no reason. But here's the thing. I think Richardson, like you talking about your lack of faith in Cliff Kingsbury, I would say that the Richardson thing is like, you got Shane Steichen, you have these weapons that really play their role particularly well. Like their AD Mitchell pick, I didn't even, I wasn't like in love with Mitchell as a prospect, but if you can't recognize the fit with what they need, like it's very obvious, right? I'm not going to say you don't know ball, but like it's a very obvious fit. And then you have Jonathan Taylor back there. Like you have this like really good environment for him. But at the same time, like, and I'm not saying this is your argument, but if someone is questioning Jayden Daniels because of lack of experience, look at Anthony Richardson. You know what I mean? Yeah. And he's going in round 5 versus going in round 10 or whatever with Jayden Daniels. I've thought about that quite a bit as I'm like doing my rankings and just looking around consensus and seeing Anthony Richardson just like shoot up boards despite playing like 3 games last year and kind of like almost proving people right, where it's like he moves too much, he's going to get hurt, and then he moved too much and he got hurt, and now we're like, yes, that's what we wanted. I'm like, I don't know, he just looks so fun playing, and I guess I don't know, in my mind you see Jayden Daniels and you think he's a little bit slimmer and he's as fast and probably almost as good of an athlete, not pound for pound, obviously, as Richardson, but it's much easier to come to the conclusion like Richardson's a gladiator, he's Cam, but they're going to do the same thing on the field. So it doesn't actually make sense. But I think the Indy situation makes me feel a lot better. That is my thing with Jayden Daniels, where it's like
he could throw for 3,500, 24 touchdowns, run for 600. I have such little faith in that happening, not because of him, but because of like Washington having the infrastructure around him to allow him to do that. So that's why I'm more betting against Washington as a team than I am Jayden Daniels as a player.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It makes sense. And I do think, like I said, I do think that like I can see the upside case, which is why I'm still cool with Daniels and drafting Dan. Like I think that it's absolutely good and fine to get him at QB 11 because I can see that upside case. But I do think there are people in the space that are taking that upside case a little bit too far because of what we've seen historically with rookie quarterbacks, even when they have been, mobile quarterbacks. One guy that you seem to also be a little bit lower on is Rachaad White. I started the offseason, like in May, whenever I look at ADP and compare to projections, it's sort of like the starting point for me. I don't draft off of projections. I tell people not to draft off of projections because there's a lot more nuance and context needed for, in fantasy football. But Rachaad White looks great in projections, right? Whenever you look at him, you're like, oh man, he's like RB8 right now in projections. Like it's very easy to see that. But then as sort of the month has gone on and I'm doing so many more drafts, I'm like, I don't know if I like him nearly as much as what these projections are saying, but what is it for you? Is it Bucky Irving? Is it the poor rushing efficiency? Do you just not think he's a special back?
It's the poor. Okay, so as I'm thinking through this question, as I saw, us talking about it in the future, I'm like, man, I don't have. It's like I've learned this lesson so many times. I'm not someone who does projections, and I think they would probably help me if I did. I would like do projections, and I would look at them and I'd be like, "That's not real," and just like kind of wipe it away.
Well, I mean, I to be honest, I kind of still do that too. It's just never going to be a perfect science unless you're Mike
never
Clay.
Perfect, but like the Rachaad White sequence is something I've done before with James Conner, and I've done before with Joe Mixon, and I see them objectively and I look at the numbers and I say, they're not special as running backs.
Yeah.
Eventually this team is going to catch on to that and stop giving them the ball. But the teams never add anyone into the mix that actually says that that's going to happen.
Or that you feel like really, really good about.
Right. Like we talk ourselves in. Like last year I'd be like, yeah, I don't really like James Conner. Like Keontae Ingram's going to like work into it. Like it's insane things that you start to say based on that. And objectively, Rachaad White has been awful on the ground in each of the last two seasons. But that was also like coming out of college. I remember watching him and being like, yo, he's really like a fun back. He's very athletic, really good pass catcher, explosive, but like he's very raw as a runner, right? Like he's someone who I think like needs to get a little bit more refined. And that's kind of played itself out in the NFL. But I'm looking at the team and saying like, oh, he's so inefficient as a runner. Like they're not going to use him the same way. And then they take Bucky Irving, who's a 190-pound back that his strong suit is what Rachaad White's already really, really good at. So
exactly.
At the end of the day, it's like Rachaad White is not sexy, but he's going to get 285 touches and he's probably going to finish as like the boring RB11. So why am I fading him to RB16 or 17? Like there's no reason for it. So I actually, as I was thinking through this part of the show sheet, kind of changed my tune a little bit on Rachaad White. And I probably will be drafting a little bit more of him. Like you can get Rachaad White at the same spots you can get like Xavier Worthy. And I'm like, dude, I really think Xavier Worthy is going to go for 700 yards this year. And I'm like, Rachaad White in a bad situation or like at worst, it's probably going to give you $1,000, maybe 1,100 and like 7 touchdowns. So I think I'm like overthinking some of these backs where the team, they're not telling you that they're moving on from this guy, right? James Conner, you can feel okay about being like, I don't like James Conner anymore because they finally added Trey Benson. And it's like, that is not the case, in my opinion, for a day 3 undersized running back to move into Rachaad White. So realistically, I just made the case for Rachaad White. I guess I'm back in, baby.
Look at that. My take has been, what if this year's Rachaad White is Rachaad White?
Probably the case.
I felt a lot more confident like a month ago. I'm not going to lie, because I started doing more and more like running back dead zone research and stuff. And he doesn't not check some boxes, but again, like we don't want to draft running backs, especially in this area of the draft, typically, where the answer is, well, who else is going to touch the ball? Because that has burned people. Look at Mike Davis with Cordero Patterson. There's examples upon example of that. But I personally, like, I don't think White is like I don't think he's a Mike Davis back, right? Like I don't think he's as bad as Mike Davis.
He's not fully replaceable. No way.
Right. And like at the very least, like his receiving numbers have actually been pretty good, and his receiving ability, we knew that coming in. Like the crazy thing with Bucky Irving, and look, anything can come to fruition and happen. We know that. Like Bucky Irving might take over the backfield for all we know. Like who knows what's going to actually go down. But realistically, like Rachaad White's receiving profile entering the NFL was better than Bucky Irving's, in my opinion. And so like why, and then all he's done is been a pretty solid receiver in the NFL. So why would we assume that that's just going to go away because Bucky Irving's there? And then it comes down to, okay, maybe Irving is a change of pace guy on the ground, which totally understand that. And I think that Irving's, sort of like maybe didn't get enough credit as a runner a little bit because of size and stuff. Maybe I didn't really like Irving that much as a prospect. I didn't either. I'm trying to look at the bull case here for Bucky Irving and do.
I'm so out on Bucky Irving.
do a little justice.
He's like, it reminds me of like Kenneth Gainwell a little bit, where like when he was coming out, he was so good as a receiver that we just wanted to push that love into the running part of his game when it wasn't really there. And I feel the same way about Bucky, where I'm like, I could objectively, he's he's going to catch passes and he's really good at doing that. Had they drafted like Blake Corum, who I think is a very good early down back, who has great vision and he's very stable and like you can trust him to not fuck up on first and second down. I'm like, that's a good pairing with Rachaad White, where I might be a little bit scared that his carries get like chopped down in half. That didn't happen. They like drafted the guy that I'm like least worried about because he's just so redundant to Rachaad White.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm trying to do my best to not be, because again, this is the kind of like trap-ish player that we've seen in the past, but I think that like there are other players like this that are probably more of traps in my opinion from like an archetype standpoint and like a dead zone, like a Zamir White or something like that. Not to say that like of course it can go in a lot of different directions like I've been saying, but it's like that's a situation where at least you look at like an Alexander Madison behind him and you're like, yeah, I don't think he's that special, but I don't know how much more special Zamir White is than Alexander Madison.
I was just about to say, going off of your quote before, like this year's Zamir White is, or this year's Alexander Madison is probably Zamir White. It's like it's staring at us right in the face, and it's going to be so obvious when we look back on it.
Yeah. Speaking of backfields, and this is a more ambiguous one. I love ambiguous backfields. I've been attacking them for years, talking about them for years on the show. I think the most interesting ambiguous backfield this year is the one in Cincinnati, because you get, Tennessee is intriguing with Spears and Pollard, but it's like, how good is that offense going to be? You get Pittsburgh, which I don't mind throwing darts at both of those guys in Pittsburgh for obvious reasons with Arthur Smith there. But like, you look at Cincinnati, you're like, okay, this is very good chance to be a top 10 offense this year. And then they have these running backs with Joe Mixon gone, where everything's up for grabs. You have these running backs who really haven't proven anything. So how are you sort of attacking that backfield?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I would agree, it's probably the most intriguing backfield that is so difficult to figure out. And I think one of the like the funnier things that I've noticed is like Buffalo, like, okay, they had Zach Moss, Devin Singletary, who didn't do anything while they were there, or at least like hit no upside.
It's true.
As soon as they moved, like Zach Moss went crazy in Indy last year. Devin Singletary, I feel like didn't get his flowers for the games that he had. Like he was great for Houston in 4 or 5 games. I'm like, what were they doing in Buffalo all those years? And they couldn't figure it out until James Cook. So I'm looking at these backs and I'm like, maybe they're a little bit better than we're giving them credit for. Maybe Zach Moss is okay. I remember liking him coming out as a prospect. He was like a great tackle breaker. He's got the size, obviously. And I mean, the intriguing part is, of course, Joe Mixon not being there. Joe Mixon's role was so like prolific in his 7-year tenure. The dude averaged 20 opportunities per game, like over a 7-year span, which is crazy, unheard of in today's NFL. And now you're trying to figure out like, where does that go? And I don't know if you need to figure out exactly where all the touches go, but I do think figuring out the goal line role will be the most important, because Joe Mixon's a guy who over the last 5 years, outside of the 1 year where he missed like 10 games, was a top 5 goal line back in terms of just pure volume down there. Someone's going to get him, and it's probably going to be Zach Moss, which is like where I lean in redraft. But you could tell by how the season progressed down the second half last year that they feel relatively comfortable with Chase Brown. He's obviously more explosive. He's a pretty good pass catcher, and I think he can step up and play well if given the opportunity to. But the signing of Zach Moss tells me that they probably feel like he has a very clear role as the starter. And with Mixon too, I think one of the draws was like there's a reason they always continuously worked in Giovanni Bernard and then Samaje Perine is because Joe Mixon was not a good pass blocker. I think Zach Moss is a lot better in that part of the game. So I think there might be some sneaky upside to Zach Moss there. Do I feel confident that it's gonna like play out over the course of the season? No, not at all. Zach Moss feels like in that Zamir White land, in that Alexander Madison land, where you're like, I don't know if I buy that this guy's good enough to like hold off anybody for a full year. So I actually feel okay drafting both of these guys where they're going in drafts. Like I think Zach Moss is like pick 95 or 100, and then Chase Brown's like pick 130, and I'm like, you know what? I don't mind either of these guys' value. I don't really have a strong take, but straight up, I'm going to go Moss there.
Yeah, I think I agree. There's a lot of data that I've looked at that says that Chase Brown is not good. And then there's a lot of data that I've looked at that says we should be targeting this kind of archetype, this guy who, second year player, pass catcher, explosive in an ambiguous backfield. Like that, those are the check. But then,
it's so easy in theory. And then when you got to do it, it's like, man.
Yeah. So I've been getting both of them as well. Obviously not on the same team, but just, getting pieces of the backfield, because not only that, but like from a best ball standpoint, it shouldn't shock anyone if like one of them misses 2 weeks with like a low ankle or something like that, or a week, and then the other guy just for that week is the bell cow, and that's all you need in a playoff week to really take your team over the top. All right, I got one last question for you, Nick. Who's the one player that you're going to try to leave every draft with this year? I love that that's always the phrase that people use with these questions when, like, of course you're not going to get this guy in every single draft, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I'm going to give you two. One's a vibe pick, and then one's a guy that I've actually is my highest known player in underdog drafts. The vibe pick is Devon Achane. I feel like you're either in on him or you're not, and I love him. Love them coming out of Texas A&M, and I just like, I can't imagine you watched him play last year and been like, he's like top 5 most electric players in the NFL, and was averaging like 25 fantasy points. It wasn't just like one good game or 2 good games. He had like 5 games out of 9 of over like 25 fantasy points. And I'm like, I feel as if you fade him this year, you are possibly missing out on like the 2013 Jamal Charles season, right? And I'm like, I don't want to look back and miss out on the obvious league winner when we look back. I get it, the size concerns, but like, look at every single running back getting drafted 1 to 2 to 3 spots above him and 1 to 2, 3 spots below him. And you show me a guy that hasn't been injured or missed a full year from an ACL or knee sprains or high ankle sprains, and I'll show you a liar, because every single running back just gets hurt all the time. So like trying to predict the injury is fucking insane to me. And he's the vibe pick for me. Some guy you mentioned before, Najee Harris. He is a guy that I'm drafting in like all the underdog drafts, because you're getting him at such an insane price of like 8th, 9th round right now. And I've never really been liked him as a rookie, was off him as his price like the last 2 years, was not a huge fan of him. But this Pittsburgh team has now invested, first round picks in back-to-back years on the offensive line. They have Arthur Smith coming over, so they're going to run the shit out of the ball. And I think one of the underrated things not really being talked about is like the reason Najee was so great as a rookie was because his passing numbers were so high. And with Deontay Johnson gone, that's like 140 targets a year, basically out of that offense. I could see, obviously Jaylen Warren's going to eat into it a little bit, but even if Najee averages an extra like target to 1.3 targets per game over the course of the season, that's massive for, a running back in terms of PPR fantasy points. So you're talking about a guy who's like, he's never seen fewer than 285 touches in a year. He scored at least 8 touchdowns. So like getting that production in round 8, I also think like the way that they finished each of the last 2 seasons show you that they're not giving Jaylen Warren the 3-down workhorse role. Like they're just not giving that backfield to him. They feel comfortable with Najee behind whoever it is under center. I also think this offense could probably have a lot more stability with Russ under center than Kenny Pickett. So I just don't think it could get worse than it was in Pittsburgh last year. And we saw Najee at his worst. I just like the value is crazy to me.
No, I agree. And the other thing with Najee is the contingent upside. Like, again, if you're in week 15, 16, 17, and you can say, look, you can make a similar-ish argument for Jaylen Warren, don't get me wrong, but like if you're in week 15, 16, 17, and one of those guys is out and the other guy's a bell cow, that's huge, massive value in this kind of offense. So I hear you. I've been drafting the Pittsburgh backs as well. And Najee, it's like a very easy, especially as you're going wide receiver heavy and you kind of just want like some stability at running back, and if you're going 0 RB, it's just really easy to just click that button and go. I mean,
between him and Rachaad White, you're getting like 600 touches, in like the 5th and 8th round, and I'm like, okay, like it's boring, but like it'll work.
Yeah, and that tier with like White in them, they just keep falling and falling too, so you're able to get some great value. Nick, it was great to chop it up, man. As always, can you let everyone know where they can find you?
Yes, sir. Pretty much just BDG across the board. YouTube, if you're into Dynasty, we have a Dynasty channel. We have the regular fantasy channel, which focuses on redraft going into the season. And we do a bunch of like NFL trivia. If you guys are into games and stuff like that, we've got them going up daily on our TikTok. And then we also have a trivia YouTube channel. So just if you type in BDG, you'll probably be able to find us somewhere.
Yeah, you guys are doing awesome stuff. As usual, you can find all my stuff over on lateround.com. Pre-order the draft guide. Find me on Twitter at lateroundqb, all that good stuff. Otherwise, everyone, thank you for tuning in.